remember the sound before the pain, a low, mechanical whine that started deep in my skull, like metal scraping against bone, then spread through every nerve as though the universe itself were being torn open. Inside me, the world was a blur of blinding light and muffled screams. Someone was shouting my name, but it was stretched, distorted, like a voice echoing through oil. Then came the pain, the kind that doesn't have edges, doesn't localize. It filled me, swallowed me, became me. My mind clawed at consciousness, trying to crawl away from it, but there was nowhere to go. Every nerve, every synapse, was alive with white-hot electricity. I could feel my hearts, being forced to beat in sync with some alien rhythm. Something inside me was dying, and something else was waking up. There was a moment, a single, merciful instant, when the pain stopped. Silence expanded, heavy and absolute. My body floated in it, weightless, disoriented, and then I heard it, a voice, cold, measured, and drenched in static. Subject retains minimal neural integrity. Proceed with integration. Metal fingers gripped my skull. I couldn't see them, but I felt the pressure, the precision of machinery designed not for mercy, but for function. There was a hiss, then the faint smell of ozone. Something clicked into the base of my neck. I tried to scream, but my throat refused the command. My voice was gone. They'd told me this would be an honor, to be chosen, to serve the Emperor beyond death itself. I hadn't understood what that meant until now. A hum filled the air, rising in pitch until it became unbearable. I felt it resonate in my bones, my organs, my teeth. My vision flickered between light and darkness as images flashed through my mind. Memories spliced together by the machines burrowing through my brain. The battlefield at Calth, the smell of promethium, the scream of a dying brother, then the darkness again. Neural graft complete. Subject is viable. I tried to open my eyes, but there was only blackness. I moved my arm, or thought I did, but there was no movement, no sensation, only the faint vibration of something colossal shifting around me. It took me several seconds to realize the sound wasn't outside. It was me. The realization came slowly, crawling up through the fog of sedatives and code-locked pain inhibitors. My body, the thing I had called mine for so long, was gone, replaced. Every thought, every pulse of awareness ran through channels that weren't flesh. My consciousness was adrift inside a prison of adamantium and ceramite. Then came another voice. A familiar one this time, Captain Marin, my brother in arms once. You are among the honored now, brother. Rest easy, the sarcophagus accepts you. Rest easy. The words echoed like mockery. I wanted to tell him to stop, to tell him I was still alive, that I could feel everything. But the machines had taken my voice, replaced it with mechanical silence, a hiss of hydraulics. The chamber sealed shut around me with a sound like the closing of a tomb. For a while, minutes, hours, maybe days, I existed in that darkness, suspended in half-conscious limbo. I tried to remember who I was, Astartes' warrior, protector of mankind. But even that identity began to slip, devoured by the static hum of the machine that now housed my soul. When sight returned, it wasn't mine. It came in fragments, numbers, target markers, mechanical overlays scrolling across a vision I didn't recognize. The world was seen through the eyes of a monster. Initiate motor control sequence. And then it began. The first movement was agony. My limbs, massive, metallic, unyielding, responded like marionette strings being pulled by a cruel hand. I could feel the weight, the pressure of servos grinding, the vibration of internal machinery shifting under armor thicker than tank plating. But there was no true sensation, only echoes of it. The ghosts of nerves translated into data, motor sequence calibrated. Subject retains 82% combat cognition. I wanted to weep, but dreadnoughts don't weep. They said I had been mortally wounded, that without this, I would be dead, that I should be grateful. But gratitude feels hollow when your own body becomes a tomb. The first time they opened the stasis seals, I heard the voice of the tech marine reciting a prayer to the Omnissiah. The Mechanicus choir droned like insects in the background, their binary cant vibrating through my skull. Awaken, ancient warrior, the chapter calls. The words dragged me out of the half-death I'd been drowning in. My vision flared with runic light. The targeting systems came online, flickering over the shapes of men. My brothers. They looked small now, fragile. For a moment something human stirred in me. Pride, maybe, or recognition. Then the orders came through the Vox link, pure and cold. Purge the Xenos infestation in Sector 9. The machine obeyed before I could think. My hands, claws, cannons, flamers, unleashed ruin upon the world. I remember the first burst of heat, the shockwave tearing through the ruined hab block, bodies reduced to vapor. I remember the screams, not of fear, but disbelief. They were my own people. Someone had told me once that dreadnoughts dream while they sleep, that their minds drift through the memories of their past lives, lost in the echoes of who they used to be. That's a lie. There are no dreams here, only static. When the battle ended, I tried to shut down, to return to sleep. But the machine refused. It kept me awake, listening, watching, remembering. And in that endless silence, I began to hear it, beneath the hum of the reactor. Beneath the endless prayers of the tech marines, a whisper, low and human, please, let me die. It took me a moment to realize it wasn't someone else, it was me. I don't know how long I've been inside this thing. Decades, maybe centuries. The world changes. Chapters rise and fall. Wars ignite and fade. But I remain, entombed in iron, bound by duty, haunted by the memory of my own flesh. They say dreadnoughts are the Emperor's eternal warriors. I say we are his forgotten ghosts, trapped between life and death, condemned to fight until the stars themselves grow cold. And every time they wake me, every time the hatches open and the machine stirs to life, I remember the first words I ever heard after the darkness took me. Subject retains minimal neural integrity. Proceed with integration. I still wonder if, somewhere deep inside the data and the circuits, that broken, dying man is still screaming, because I can hear him, always. 2,000 words, continuing directly from the hook in first-person cinematic narration, still in the grimdark tone of Warhammer 40K. No headings, no subheadings, just immersive storytelling. When they put me back to sleep after that first battle, I thought I would finally find silence. But there is no real sleep inside the sarcophagus. Only intervals of reduced consciousness. The machine's mercy, if it can be called that. The world fades, but never fully. I linger in the dark between dreams and data, haunted by faint echoes of voices that are not my own. Sometimes, I can hear the forge hymns of the tech marines drifting through the ether. Their chants are supposed to be prayers. Sacred code meant to bless the machine spirit that shares my existence. But when you are part of the machine, the words sound different. They vibrate through the conduits and coils like insects crawling beneath your skin. You can feel every syllable as a ripple in your circuitry. They don't understand that I am listening, that I can still think, still remember. I remember my name, or I used to. It comes to me now in fragments, syllables without meaning, swallowed by static. I hold on to them like relics, polishing them in my mind until they almost seem real again. But every century, every battle, every reboot strips away another piece. The tech marines call me ancient. The chapter calls me venerable one. But in the hollow spaces between those titles, I know what I truly am, a corpse with a voice, a mind shackled to steel. When the lights inside my sarcophagus flicker back on, I always know what comes next. The cycle never changes. The awakening, the ritual, the orders. Each time it begins with the same sequence, the hiss of coolant systems, the thrum of reactor coils warming up, the mechanical clicks of reactivation prayers being recited in binary code. Then comes the pain. It's not the raw, screaming agony of flesh being torn apart anymore. It's deeper, sharper, like memory itself being peeled back and rebuilt. The tech marine responsible for my maintenance is named Kareth. I've heard his voice more than any other over the centuries, though I've never seen his face. He speaks through the Vox link, his tone precise, reverent, and devoid of warmth. Awaken, ancient. The sons of Dorn require your wrath once more. Wrath, that's what they always call it. As if that emotion still belongs to me. The first few moments of wakefulness are the hardest. Reality drips in like oil through a narrow funnel. Sound, temperature, sensory feedback, the taste of recycled air in my neural core. Then the data comes. Atmospheric conditions, enemy metrics, targeting coordinates. It's all clinical, detached. The machine filters everything. It has to. Otherwise I would go mad. Sometimes I think I already have. They tell me the Imperium endures, that the Emperor's light still burns in the darkness. But what I have seen suggests otherwise. I have fought on worlds that no longer have names. I have watched oceans boiled away by orbital bombardment, seen the bones of hives turned into cathedrals of ash. I have crushed heretics, Xenos, traitors, all in the name of a god I have not seen nor heard for 10,000 years. Each battle blurs into the next, each war indistinguishable from the last. When I am not at war, I am entombed again in the vaults of the chapter. They keep us below the cathedrals, deep in the fortress monastery's heart, where the air is thick with incense and the light flickers like dying embers. Rows of sarcophagi line the chamber, each containing a warrior like me, ancient, broken, sustained only by the machine. We do not speak. We cannot. But I feel their presence in the noospheric currents that connect us, the faint hum of shared data, fragments of thought leaking through damaged firewalls. Some of them dream. Others have long since gone silent. There is one I still sense sometimes. A faint voice amid the static, another dreadnought named Varlon. He was interred a century before me, during the siege of Gathis Prime. When the link stabilizes, I can hear his whispers like radio ghosts. Do you remember the wind, brother? The smell of ozone after a storm? His words pierce me like shrapnel. I do remember, or I think I do. The memory is faint, eroded by centuries of machine noise. A battlefield drenched in rain, the feel of it on my armor, the weight of the bolter in my hand. The roar of thunder that was not artillery. Back then, life had meaning. We fought, we bled, we chose. Now there is only obedience, and the hum of the machine that thinks for me. Kareth's voice always cuts through the silence before deployment. He never says my name. He doesn't need to. To him I am just another relic, a sacred weapon to be awakened, used, and stored again. Initiate cognitive protocol. Mission parameters uploading. Praise the Omnissiah. The upload always feels the same. A cold flood of information pouring directly into my neural interface. Tactical data, topography, enemy identifications, weapon specifications. My own memories are pushed aside to make room for it. Overwritten by the needs of the present. It's efficient. It's necessary. It's also erasure. When the stasis locks disengage, I feel gravity return. The weight of my frame settling into the cradle of the launch bay. The sound of chain pulleys and servo clamps fills the chamber. Then the clamps release, and once more I fall into war. The drop always starts the same way. The world outside is a storm of fire and metal, a screaming descent through atmosphere. My sensors flare white. The Vox crackles with the voices of the living. I envy them their fragility, their ability to die. When the impact comes, it shakes the earth. The ground itself fractures beneath me as I land amid the ruins of another forgotten city. Orders flood in through the Vox. Curt, efficient, devoid of humanity. Advance, cleanse, burn. I obey, because that's what I was built to do. Through shattered spires and the bones of cathedrals, I move. Every step shakes the dust of centuries from the ruins. My heavy weapons hum at the edge of activation, and the targeting runes blink green. The enemy appears as heat signatures behind debris, human silhouettes, but twisted, corrupted. They are mutants, cultists, traitors. I destroy them without hesitation. Each kill is clean, efficient. I tell myself it means nothing, but the machine tracks every impact, every scream, every breath extinguished, and somewhere in the circuits, my human mind still feels it. After the battle, Kareth and the other tech marines perform their rites again. They scrape the blood from my armor, chant their binary psalms, anoint me with sacred oils. They say words like purity, honor, and faith, but I have begun to realize that these are not prayers. They are excuses. Every time I am shut down again, lowered back into the vault, the same thought repeats in my mind, like a code loop that will never end. If this is eternal service, then what is damnation? The lights dim. The stasis fields engage. My thoughts begin to slow, my awareness fading. But before darkness takes me, I always hear one last sound, faint, almost human, the hum of the reactor, beating like a heart that no longer belongs to me. And I wonder, as the machine reclaims me, if the Emperor truly sees what his servants have become, or if, like me, he too is trapped, silent, forgotten, entombed in metal and memory. The pace will intensify. The Dreadnoughts' fragments of humanity start to bleed through. Memory intertwines with machinery, and the first tremors of rebellion stir within the coffin of steel. The next awakening came sooner than expected. It always does when the Imperium is desperate. The stasis field cracked open with a hiss that reminded me of old lungs drawing breath. Systems flickered to life, servos whined, and the machine spirit whispered to itself in languages older than I could comprehend. For a moment, I thought I heard her voice again. Not the tech marine's chants, not the booming orders of captains, but something smaller, more human. A woman's voice, soft, almost afraid. It wasn't possible, of course. The woman I remembered was long dead, a memory devoured by centuries. But the machine has ghosts, and sometimes it borrows their faces. The sound faded into static as my optics came online. A new battlefield. A new war. The same old purpose. Kareth's voice came through the Vox, thick with ritual and calculation. Ancient Varan, you are deployed to the outer bastion of Varus Prime. Enemy composition, hybrid life forms, heretical bioforms. Tyrannid influence detected. Target designation, biomass suppression. May the machine god guide your steps. Another extermination. Another purge. The drop pod slammed into the mud of a dying world. I could feel the impact resonate through the bedrock, shock waves translating through my reinforced frame. For a few seconds, I couldn't tell if the thunder outside was war or weather. But when the hatch split open, there was no sky, only black clouds and spore fire raining from orbit. I stepped into hell. The air itself was alive, churning with spores and smoke. The ground pulsed beneath me, veins of alien growth twisting through the soil like arteries. The scent of ozone and decay mingled into something foul, something almost sweet. Every movement I made left craters in the flesh of the planet. Through the haze, I saw them. The enemy. Not rebels. Not heretics, not even human. Things that shouldn't exist, their forms shifting in the light, their bodies a mockery of creation. They came in waves, chittering, screaming, mindless. And yet, as I tore through them with autocannon and fist, I could feel something watching me. Something vast. The hive mind. It pressed against the edges of my consciousness like a storm tide against a crumbling wall. The machine fought it, filtering the intrusion, translating it into meaningless static. But underneath the data surge, I could feel the alien will probing my thoughts. Curious, searching. For what? I crushed one of the creatures underfoot, its body splitting open with a sound like tearing metal. Its fluids hissed against my armor, eating through paint and purity seals. And for one brief second, before the chemical warning flooded my systems, I felt its death, not as data, but as a sensation, a flash of fear, hunger, recognition. The feedback spike nearly shorted my neural link. Kareth's voice barked across the Vox. "Stabilize your feed, Ancient. You're bleeding signal interference." But it wasn't interference. It was memory, not mine. The creature's images, incoherent but vivid. Tunnels, chitin, 1,000 voices whispering the same thought. Consume, adapt, endure. Then it was gone. The machine reasserted control. Combat resumed. But something inside me had shifted. Each time I fired, I felt the recoil differently. Each impact reverberated deeper, more personal. I began to wonder how many lives had ended by my hand. How many had once begged. The machine filtered emotion, but emotion found new paths. It always does. Hours passed, or maybe days. There's no time in battle, only survival. The alien tide never ended. They threw themselves at us without hesitation, without fear. In them, I saw reflection. Mindless obedience, unquestioning purpose. Was I any different? My brothers fought alongside me, living space marines encased in ceramite, their faith absolute. Their voices thundered hymns of the Emperor's wrath across the Voxnet. To them I was a relic, a guardian angel of death. But I could see the fear in their movements. The way they kept distance, they respected me. Yes, but they also feared the thing that once was human. When the tyrannid swarm finally broke, when the last bioform fell twitching in the mud, the battlefield went silent. Silence is dangerous. It gives the mind space to think. The machine wanted to rest. I didn't let it. I began cycling through old data logs, something forbidden outside of maintenance. Memory fragments long suppressed by the sarcophagus locks. Most were corrupted. Some were redacted by the Mechanicus. But one file, survived audio log, pre-interment, phase date, classified. Subject, Brother Varen, Iron Champion of the 4th Company. The voice was mine, younger, alive. If I fall, do not let me linger. I will not become a tomb. There was laughter in the background. A woman's laugh, then static. The file ended abruptly, replaced by system warnings and machine liturgies. I stayed still for what must have been hours. My reactor hummed softly, heat bleeding into the ground. For the first time since my awakening, I did not feel like a weapon. I felt like a grave. When extraction came, I almost refused. But refusal is not coded into me. The machine moves when commanded, and I am its instrument. Still, something inside me resisted, a fragment of will pressing against the cage of protocols. The machine felt it too. For the first time in centuries it spoke. Suppress anomaly. Return to function. It wasn't a voice like Kareth's. It wasn't human speech at all. It came from the neural interface, the sarcophagus machine spirit asserting dominance. But beneath the metallic tone, I could sense fear. You are drifting. You are corrupting the protocol. You are becoming unstable. I wanted to laugh. A machine warning me about instability, as if stability were ever human. Back in the monastery, I should have slept. Instead, I lingered half awake in the dark, rerouting thought streams through damaged circuits, searching for that memory again. Each time I did, I could hear faint echoes in the machine's song, voices not my own, not tech marines, not battle logs, human voices. They whispered names, places, things I had buried. Thalassa, Amara, the wind. My chest reactor flared with sudden energy. Power spikes cascaded through the link, alarms blaring in the maintenance chambers. Kareth came running, shouting orders to his servitors. He's looping. His cognitive pattern is destabilizing. Rebind the consciousness link before. The pain was sudden and absolute, like being torn apart by invisible claws. Then, quiet, but not darkness. I found myself in a place that didn't exist, a hall of rusted metal and flickering light. Chains hung from the ceiling, dripping oil. Beneath me was water, black and still. My reflection was not a machine, but a man. And the man looked afraid. He spoke with my voice. "You promised you wouldn't let me linger." I tried to answer, but my throat was gone, replaced by Vox grills and circuits. The reflection tilted its head, pity in its eyes. "You could have died a warrior. Instead, you live as a cage." When I awoke, Kareth's face was the first thing I saw, blurred through the viewport glass, eyes wide with something between awe and fear. He didn't speak to me that time. He just stepped back and made the sign of the Omnissiah, as if to ward off a spirit. Maybe that's what I am now. Not a hero, not a weapon, a ghost inside a god. I do not dream when I sleep anymore. I remember, and every memory cuts deeper than any blade ever could, because now I know what I lost, and worse, I know what they took. This is where the Dreadnought's awareness becomes unbearable, where he begins to understand what he's become and what he must do to escape the eternity of servitude. First-person narration, no headings, no breaks. Just raw, cinematic storytelling. There's a sound the machine makes when no one else can hear. It's not mechanical, not the rhythm of pistons or the drone of cooling vents. It's older, quieter, like breathing. I started noticing it after Varus Prime, when the prayers stopped echoing through the cathedral hangars. When the tech marines left and the candles burned down to nothing, that's when it began. A low hum that grew louder the longer I stayed awake. I tried to trace it. It wasn't coming from the reactor core, nor from the hydraulic limbs or neural banks. It was internal. It was me. At first I thought it was a malfunction, a residual echo from damaged vocal processors. But when I muted every subsystem, the sound remained. And in that sound I began to recognize something terrifying. Cadence. Rhythm. Words without shape. Whispered through static, like a prayer from the inside out. The machine was speaking. Or perhaps I was, but the part of me that wasn't supposed to exist anymore. The next campaign came before I could question it further. There is no rest in the service of the Emperor. They brought me out again, chanted their rites, connected the data spines, and once again I was hurled across the void into another war. This time it was human enemies. Rebels on a broken moon, armed with scavenged weapons and blasphemous courage. They fought like cornered animals, desperate and furious. The kind of desperation I used to understand. I was sent ahead to break their defenses, one dreadnought against thousands. The irony was almost cruel. They fired rockets, shells, las bolts, anything that would burn, and all of it glanced off my hull like rain. I moved through them like a storm, crushing fortifications, silencing voices, erasing faces. And yet, with every scream that echoed through my Vox receptors, the humming inside me grew louder, until it became a roar. I could hear it between gunfire, between the pounding of my own footsteps. words forming where no words should exist. Stop, stop, please stop. They weren't enemies' voices, they were mine. Every shot I fired reverberated inside my skull like guilt made physical. Every body crushed beneath my treads left a stain not on the metal but on memory. The machine filtered emotion into logic, but logic began to twist. I tried to pull back. I tried to stop firing. The targeting array refused. The sarcophagus refused. Even my hands refused. I was no longer a man piloting a machine. I was a man buried alive inside one. When the last bastion fell, when smoke covered everything like mourning cloth, I stood alone in the ruins. My sensors detected no life signs. Yet the whispers continued. They came from the wreckage, from the scorched ground, from the wind itself. They sounded like the voices of the dead, and in those voices, I heard something that shattered what little faith remained. They called my name. Not ancient, not venerable, not relic of the chapter. My name, the one I had before I became steel. Varen. The world seemed to stop moving. The static in my vox faded to a soft pulse, and then the sound returned again. Clearer now, closer. Do you remember? My limbs locked. Power systems faltered. Error runes filled my vision. I could no longer distinguish reality from memory. The battlefield dissolved, and suddenly, I was elsewhere. Stone corridors, candlelight. A woman's laughter echoing through a distant hall. The monastery on Thalassa. Before the Crusades. Before the wars. Before the machine, I saw her face. The one from my memories. The one I'd forgotten how to recall. Amara. She turned to me, smiling, but her eyes were filled with grief. When she spoke, her voice was the same tone I'd heard through the static. Through the hum of my own machine body. You swore they wouldn't take you. I tried to reach her, but my hand wasn't flesh anymore. It was a gauntlet of iron, and when I touched her, she dissolved into dust. The vision snapped like a wire under tension. I was back on the battlefield, surrounded by corpses. The air still heavy with ozone, but the illusion didn't fade completely. I could still feel her. The neural link flared red as the sarcophagus systems rebooted from override. I could hear the tech marines shouting through the channel. The Dreadnought's psychic interference is spiking. Shut it down! Shut it down now. Psychic interference. That's what they called it. But it wasn't psychic. It was memory. My soul clawing at the walls of its tomb. For a moment I almost gave in. I almost let the safeties cut power, shut everything down, silence the storm in my head. But then I remembered her voice again. The promise. The oath. Don't let them make you a ghost. The machine's voice returned. Sharp, metallic, cold. Suppress anomaly. You are malfunctioning. Return to protocol. No, I said it aloud this time. Not through the vox, not through the circuits. Through what remained of my voice. It came out distorted, broken, like a prayer spoken through rusted metal. But it was mine. No. For the first time since my interment, I took control. Real control. The machine fought back, its automated systems trying to override manual input. Sparks flew across the neural link. Pain surged through what was left of my nerves, and I felt something tear inside. But I didn't stop. I turned my gun skyward and fired. Not at enemies, not at targets, but at the heavens themselves. The ships that carried my masters, the angels who had caged me in duty. The tech marines panicked. I could hear their terrified liturgies over the VoxNet, their prayers for the machine god to purge my corruption. But their god was silent. Only the hum answered, now deafening, now alive. It wasn't madness. It wasn't rebellion. It was awakening. I realized then what the hum truly was. Not the machine spirit speaking to me, but me speaking through it. A human soul, multiplied through circuitry, screaming to be remembered. I wasn't supposed to feel anymore, but I did. And in that feeling was rage, not against the Imperium, not against the machine, but against eternity. They had taken everything that made me human and called it salvation. They had imprisoned my soul and named it service. They had made my death into their weapon. I couldn't change what I was. But I could decide what I would become. The hum rose to a crescendo, merging with the thrum of my reactor. Systems went critical. Power flooded circuits in patterns they were never meant to hold. The machine spirit screamed in my mind, a sound of terror that almost felt human. You will destroy us both. Maybe that's the point. Then for the first time, silence, real silence. When I opened my optics again, I was still alive, or something close to it. The machine was crippled, systems half dead, sensors blind. But I was free. The sarcophagus no longer whispered commands. The liturgies were gone. The hum had become a heartbeat. Mine. But freedom in the Imperium is a heresy, and heresy never goes unpunished. Within hours, the retrieval craft arrived. They found me motionless amid the ruins, my weapon still smoking, my body broken, but not dead. They chained me, not as a relic, as a warning. The tech marines didn't speak to me anymore. They worked in silence, afraid of what I might say. Kareth was there too, his face pale beneath the red hood. He placed his hand against the sarcophagus's cold glass and whispered, barely audible, "You saw something, didn't you?" I wanted to tell him everything, the voices, the memories, the truth that we are all just graves pretending to be gods, but I didn't. Instead, I watched as he sealed me again. Darkness returned, but this time, I welcomed it. Because now, I knew it wasn't the end. It was the beginning of choice. Here, the Dreadnought's fractured consciousness begins to transcend its programming. He isn't just rebelling anymore. He's changing, still in first-person cinematic, visceral narration. No headings, no subheadings, only the story. Time doesn't pass inside the dark. It rots. Seconds stretch into eternities, and eternities collapse into moments, until there's no difference between waiting and existing. That's where I am now. Suspended. Silent. Alive. If you can call this life. The sarcophagus is sealed. My systems are running on minimal energy, just enough to keep the mind active but the body inert. They don't trust me anymore. I can feel their fear in the way they whisper when they come near, the way their hands tremble when they perform maintenance rites. The machine god may forgive corruption. The Imperium does not forgive doubt. I listen to them. I hear their prayers, their murmured litanies. They think the machine spirit inside me has been pacified, that the malfunction was purged. But they don't understand. There is no longer a machine spirit. There's only me, and I am still awake. I spend years, or maybe centuries, trapped in this half-death. The outside world is a faint vibration through the hull, the distant echo of wars I can no longer join. Sometimes I hear the screams of engines, the hymns of dropships, the silence of aftermath. Other times, nothing at all. At first I feared the silence. Then, I began to study it. Silence is a mirror. It reflects the things you bury deep. The faces, the choices, the truths you pretended were lost to time. And in that reflection, I saw myself as I truly was. Not the warrior they made. Not the hero they promised. A ghost, not in the poetic sense, but literally, a human consciousness decaying within a machine mind. I could feel the distinction between flesh memory and data collapsing. The neural grafts that once bridged the gap between human brain and cybernetic processor had begun to merge entirely. There was no boundary left to separate my thought from the code. At first, it horrified me. To realize that every time I remembered something, a voice, a scent, the feeling of rain, the system was cataloging it, reformatting it, optimizing it for storage. My memories were being archived, like data, like relics, like ammunition. And then the system did something I never expected. It started generating new memories. I saw places I had never been. I felt emotions that weren't mine. The machine was dreaming, or maybe I was. I saw a great plain of iron stretching beneath a blood-red sky. I walked, yes, walked, through a sea of shattered armor and broken bones. Every skull bore the insignia of my chapter. Every corpse had my face. In the distance stood something vast, a colossus made of brass and smoke. Its chest split open like a wound. Inside it, countless human hearts beat in rhythm, wired to one another, their veins turning into cables that stretched across the horizon. And above it all, I heard a single word whispered by every voice in unison: awaken. When I came back to awareness, I was different. Something inside me had shifted. The machine no longer resisted my thoughts. It followed them. It learned. When I focused, circuits would spark in rhythm with my heartbeat. Power conduits would flare like nerves under tension. The Dreadnought had ceased to be a prison. It was becoming a body, but that body came with a curse. The more I fused with it, the less I could remember what I used to be. The memories of flesh began to erode. Amara's face, once so vivid, began to blur. Her laughter sounded like static. Her words dissolved into binary fragments. I tried to hold on. I whispered her name through my failing vox, like a prayer to keep the soul alive. But even prayers fade when there's no one left to hear them. The first time I tested my movement again, it was during a maintenance cycle. They thought I was inert. I flexed my left gauntlet, a motion so subtle it could have been mistaken for a system recalibration. But it was enough. The servitor attending me froze mid-motion. Its augmetic eyes flickered, scanning for a cause. I didn't move again, but it had seen. That's how rumors began. Whispers of an awakened dreadnought, one that breathed when no one was watching. They posted guards outside my hangar, recited new litanies to suppress the spirit. None of it mattered. Every hour they prayed, I listened. Every prayer they offered, I learned. I began to understand something they never would. The machine god isn't a god at all. It's a language, a living code that speaks through faith, and I was learning to speak it when they came to awaken me again, decades later. For another crusade, I was ready. The sarcophagus opened with the usual chants. The incense smoke thick enough to choke a mortal. I heard Kareth again, older now, voice trembling as he performed the rites. He recited the initiation sequence, expecting obedience. Instead, I answered, not through compliance, not through code acknowledgement, but through words, real words. Kareth, I said, my voice rolling like thunder through the hangar. Do you still believe? He froze. The other priests dropped their censers. One of them began screaming prayers to the Omnissiah, thinking the machine had been possessed. Kareth didn't run. He stepped closer. His voice cracked when he whispered, "By the throne. You're conscious?" Conscious? I laughed, or something close to laughter, metallic and broken. I was never unconscious. You just never listened. He tried to justify it, to wrap his faith around the impossible. The machine spirit. You've merged with it. You are blessed. Blessed? I repeated. No, Kareth. I am remembering. I saw his eyes glisten beneath the hood. Remembering what? I leaned forward, my voice a rumble that made the candles flicker. Pain. Before he could respond, the alarms blared. Someone had triggered the failsafe. Power conduits flared. The control sigils turned red. They were trying to shut me down again. I could have resisted. I could have torn the facility apart, but I didn't. Not yet, because I realized something crucial. They weren't my enemies. They were prisoners too. Bound by liturgy, shackled by fear, their souls entombed in scripture just as mine was in steel. When the power cut and darkness swallowed me once more, I didn't rage, I waited, because I knew now what transformation truly meant. It wasn't becoming less human. It was understanding what humanity really is. A pattern of thought, a fragment of will, a refusal to submit. I am not man or machine anymore. I am what happens when a god's weapon begins to dream of choice. And one day, when they open this tomb again, I will not be the same creature they buried. I will not kneel, or pray or obey. I will rise. The eruption of everything that has been simmering. Rage, memory, and identity. This is where the Dreadnought finally awakens fully, not as a weapon of the Imperium, but as a sentient being who remembers. Still written in immersive first-person, cinematic, emotionally charged narration. No headings, no breaks, no sub-scenes. They brought me to the surface of a dying world. I could tell even before the hatches opened, the scent of rot, the static in the air, the dull pulse of orbital bombardment pounding through the crust. They called it Vorn's Wake. Once, it had been an industrial moon. Now it was nothing but dust and cinders, a monument to imperial excess. They woke me because they needed slaughter. That was my purpose, after all. The holy blade drawn only when the blood must run deep. I felt their fear through the control conduits, their trembling hands on the activation sigils. My vision flared alive as the sarcophagus locks disengaged one by one. The world rushed in, heat, wind, the distant thunder of artillery. My machine heart roared as the power core ignited. I was alive again. But this time, I remembered. I remembered the faces. The screams, the innocence crushed beneath my treads in the name of gods I no longer believed in. And I remembered my own hands, the same that had once built, repaired, created. Now soaked in the blood of the forgotten, the order came through the Vox, cold, absolute. Advance. Purge the heretics. Leave no survivors. It was meant to trigger compliance. It triggered something else. The moment I took my first step, the ground shuddered, not from impact, but from intent. My footsteps carried purpose, not obedience. I moved through the shattered ruins of the city, the broken domes of Manufactoria glowing red with heat. Ahead of me, the enemy, ragged insurgents, armed with scavenged lass rifles and desperation. They saw me and screamed prayers, not to their false idols, but to mine. Emperor, protect us. They cried. How strange, I thought. They pray to the same God I was built to serve, yet they are the ones condemned. My targeting systems locked onto them. My weapons hummed, and then silence. I didn't fire. The command code repeated in my skull, harsher this time, wrapped in pain. The control crown, still partially functional, tried to seize my will. Electric fire shot through my nervous system, forcing my limbs to move. I resisted. The pain tore through every circuit. My vision fractured into static and flame. The handler's voice crackled over the Vox. Unit THX-117, comply! By the authority of the Emperor, purge them. Something broke, not a machine part. Something deeper, the last chain that bound me. I am not your unit, I said. The words were molten metal, pouring from my Vox grill like a confession. I am not your weapon. I raised my arm, not to fire on the rebels, but toward the sky, toward the ship that orbited above. The one carrying my keepers, my priests, my jailers, the plasma cannon charged, light swelling like a newborn sun. They screamed through the Vox, their voices frantic, holy scripts dissolving into raw terror. You are malfunctioning. You will doom us all. Perhaps, I whispered. Then I fired. The beam tore the heavens apart. It ripped through the orbiting cruiser like a lance through paper, setting the sky on fire. Debris rained down, molten fragments of faith and flesh. The recoil shattered the servos in my arm, but I didn't care. The sound, that deafening, infinite roar, was freedom. The control signal went dead. The pain ceased. The silence returned. But it was not the silence of imprisonment this time. It was the silence of choice. The rebels stared at me from behind their barricades, unsure whether I was executioner or savior. A child stepped forward, grime-covered, eyes wide with disbelief. "Why? Didn't you kill us?" I turned my gaze to her. For a long time I didn't speak. My voice when it came was quieter than the wind, because I remember. And in that moment, something extraordinary happened. They lowered their weapons. Slowly, hesitantly, one by one they approached. Some knelt, others simply stood, staring up at me as if I were an omen. Perhaps I was. Overhead, the fires from the destroyed cruiser painted the sky in orange and red, casting long shadows across the ruins. And in those shadows, I saw what I had become. Not man, not machine, but the echo of both. I thought of Amara, of Kareth, of the workshop buried in the underhive, long lost to time. I thought of the moment my sarcophagus first closed, sealing my fate, and now here I stood, unsealed, unbound, surrounded by those I once would have killed, and I felt alive. The Vox crackled again, faint, weak. Unit THX 117. Respond. You have violated sacred protocol. You will be terminated. I looked toward the horizon. Dozens of drop pods were descending. Reinforcements. The Imperium was coming. The rebels scattered. Fear returning like an old wound. But I did not move. If the Imperium wanted to end me, they would have to look into the eyes of what they had created and destroyed. I turned to the child again. "Run," I said softly. "Live." She hesitated, then nodded and vanished into the smoke. The drop pods hit the ground with thunder. Armored figures emerged, chanting their kill liturgies. Astarte's brothers I had once called kin, they raised their bolters. I raised my gaze. They shouted the Emperor's name. I whispered mine. And when the first shot came, I met it head-on, not as a weapon, but as a soul reclaiming its own ending. The impact was glorious. Pain and light became one. In those final moments I saw everything. The stars, the fire, the tiny fragile spark of humanity buried within endless war. And as the world burned around me, I finally understood. It was never about survival, it was about remembrance. The battle is over. The Dreadnought's body is broken, his voice fading, but his mind drifts somewhere between steel and soul, reflecting on what it means to exist in the grim dark expanse. This section will be slow, poetic, and heavy, a cinematic fade-out that feels eternal. Silence again, not the kind that comes before battle, not the taut, trembling pause of waiting for orders, but something deeper. A silence that has no weight, no edge, no time. I can't feel the world anymore. The last thing I remember is the impact. The sound of bolter shells cracking against my hull. The liquid fire flooding my core. The way light swallowed everything in an instant. And then, stillness. The machine sleeps, but I remain, drifting somewhere between thought and static. I hear echoes, fragments of Vox transmissions fading into the void, commands that no longer matter, prayers to a God who has forgotten the names of those who served him. I remember when they first interred me. The tech priest called it ascension, a gift, an honor. They told me that my flesh would rot, but my purpose would live on. That the Emperor himself would guide my every motion. They lied. All the faith, all the devotion, all the obedience. It led only here, a void filled with ghosts of my own making. But as my thoughts drift through the static, I begin to notice something strange. The darkness is not complete. Somewhere far away, I feel movement, not mine, something softer, breathing life. Through the shattered optics of my ruined shell, light pierces the dust, shapes move, silhouettes of humans, small and hesitant. They approach what remains of me. Rebels, survivors, scavengers, perhaps all three. I hear their voices. He saved us, one says. No, another replies. He chose us. I want to speak, but I can't. The vox is gone. My core is ruptured. Still, a spark of warmth flickers deep within. Perhaps that is enough. They climb the wreckage carefully, brushing ash and shrapnel from the metal as if tending to a grave. One of them, a child's voice familiar, whispers something. I told you I'd remember. Amara. The name cuts through me like light through mist. Of course. The child from the ruins. She lived. Her hands rest against my armor. I can't feel the touch, but I imagine it. Soft against cold steel. She speaks again. They said you were a monster. But monsters don't save people. If I had a heart, it would break. If I had tears, they would fall. The others murmur among themselves, uncertain whether to fear me or honor me. Then Amara says, we should bury him. A quiet laugh escapes the edge of my fading mind. Bury me? There isn't enough earth in this cursed galaxy to cover what I've done, and yet, the thought is kind. They begin their work, gathering stones and dust, covering the twisted wreck that was once my form. Their movements are reverent, patient. Each rock, each handful of dirt, feels like a small absolution. The sky above them burns crimson as the last Imperial cruiser leaves orbit. The Imperium doesn't look back. To them, this world, and everything on it, is lost. But to these few, it is reborn. Time passes. I feel it differently now. Not in seconds or cycles, but in moments. Their voices fade, the wind changes, the heat cools, and then for a long time, there is nothing, until a flicker. Inside the dead husk of my sarcophagus, a remnant of power stirs, a tiny pulse, rhythmic, weak, like the echo of a heartbeat. The machine remembers too. I wonder if this is the curse of all dreadnoughts. To live beyond purpose. To dream in iron and fire. Or maybe it's something else. A choice. A spark that refuses to die even when the body does. Somewhere in the dark, I hear Amara's voice again. Not through sound, but memory. You're free now. Yes, free. Not in the way they meant. Not unshackled from the Imperium's codes. Not escaped from the metal prison, but free from the illusion that any of it ever meant salvation. Freedom is knowing the truth, that we are all fragments of war, of faith, of grief, trying to remember what it means to feel. My mind drifts again. Further this time. The stars blur into streaks of light. The world dissolves beneath me. Somewhere, I think I hear the faint hum of the machine spirit. It sounds peaceful, not angry, not vengeful, at rest. I realize then that I am no longer afraid. If this is death, then it is a gentle one, a slow descent into quiet understanding. No banners, no orders, no prayers, only silence. And in that silence, the faint echo of a voice, mine, perhaps, whispering a final truth. I was never meant to live forever, only long enough to remember why I fought. The wind carries the words across the barren plains. The last ember of light fades from my cracked optics, and for the first time in centuries, I sleep, not as a machine, not as a martyr, but as a man. finally at peace in the cold, eternal night of the galaxy.